The moment I woke that morning, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on me, a presence I couldn't name, but that filled the room like smoke. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting lines across the floor, but the light didn't touch me. It only reminded me that the world outside continued, oblivious to the storm that had taken root in my life. My parents were already awake, their voices carrying through the apartment in muted arguments, words I didn't yet fully understand, yet that vibrated in my chest like distant thunder. I got out of bed, feeling the familiar ache in my back and the tension in my chest that had become part of my everyday existence. Every step toward the bathroom felt deliberate, measured, cautious, because I had learned that even the smallest misstep could ripple through our fragile household. The mirror reflected a face I barely recognized. Emily Carter, 17, living in a world that had shifted beneath her feet. A girl whose innocence had been stolen piece by piece, whose trust in everyone had already begun to fracture. My eyes traced the pale shadows under my eyes, evidence of nights spent lying awake, imagining possibilities that terrified me. The tension in our apartment wasn't new, but it had evolved into something I could almost touch. Vanessa, my mother, moved like a ghost, carrying guilt like a heavy coat, each step measured as if she could contain the weight of her betrayal within herself. Daniel, my father, paced the living room, hands in pockets, jaw tight, voice low but vibrating with barely contained anger. I stayed on the edges, listening, cataloging every word, every movement, every tremor in the air. It felt like walking through a minefield, each sound, each glance, each breath threatening to detonate the chaos that had been building for years. School was no refuge. Friends whispered, rumors floated, and I felt the invisible weight of judgment pressing down. Every conversation carried an unspoken risk. If I smiled too brightly, it could be read as naivete. If I laughed, it could be seen as complicity. The truth, the secret that gnawed at the edges of my life like a slow, relentless predator, had to be hidden. I had learned to cloak myself, to move like a shadow through my days, avoiding attention, measuring every syllable, every look, every fleeting moment of intimacy. The story of my life was written in half-truths and silences. My mother's betrayal, the hidden nights, the secret messages, the lies that had begun long before I could even understand what love or trust meant, hung over me like a storm cloud. I understood the fragility of everything, the ease with which life could pivot, the way one secret could unravel years of stability, one misstep could change everything. I felt it in my gut, the knowledge that something catastrophic was lurking, ready to pounce, ready to reshape everything I had ever known. I remember one moment clearly. A text on my mother's phone, glanced at accidentally, a name that didn't belong in our family, a plan that had been set in motion before I was even born. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This world was not safe, not fair, and certainly not predictable. Every plan, every word, every gesture of the adults around me carried the weight of hidden motives and dangerous consequences. I could sense, without being able to articulate it fully, that my life was already on the brink of chaos, that the foundation of what I believed to be true was built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Even Ryan, my father's closest friend, or perhaps something more, something undefined, moved through our lives with the careful precision of someone who knew too much, someone who carried his own secrets, his own entanglements, his own potential for destruction. I watched him from a distance, wary, aware, my instincts screaming at me that nothing in this web of adult deceit could be trusted, nothing safe, nothing permanent. That morning, I walked to the window and looked out at the streets of New York. The city was alive, indifferent, bustling with energy, unaware of the quiet, invisible battles being fought in apartments and hearts across the skyline. I wondered how anyone could live in such a world without becoming hardened, paranoid, cautious in every movement, every thought. I wondered how I would survive it, how I could navigate a labyrinth of lies, betrayals, and danger that I had not yet fully seen, but already feared with every fiber of my being. The sound of my parents' voices escalated, carrying a sharp edge I had learned to recognize. Vanessa's words were quick, desperate, apologetic, but underneath them was a tremor of fear, guilt, and hidden shame. Daniel's tone was controlled but dangerous, carefully restrained. a man balancing rage and responsibility on a knife's edge. I remained in my room, listening, cataloging, aware that each phrase, each inflection, each hesitation could be a harbinger of events that might spiral beyond anyone's control. I had learned early in life that silence could be a weapon, that watching, waiting, understanding the movements of others before reacting was the key to survival. Every glance, every whispered word, every movement was significant. I could feel the tension like a physical presence, pressing against my chest, my mind, my very being. I knew that life was not merely unpredictable. It was actively conspiring, shaping events, directing chaos, and preparing a stage I could not yet see but would soon inhabit fully. And as I sat by the window, feeling the city pulse below me, I understood the inescapable truth. I was a character in a story far larger than my own understanding, a story written in deception, betrayal, and consequences that would one day arrive with irreversible force. The secret my mother carried, the lies that surrounded me, the carefully orchestrated manipulations of those around me. It was all moving, all building, all converging toward a moment I could not yet imagine, but that I would not be able to avoid. The quivering line between safety and danger, between love and deception, between innocence and destruction, had already been crossed. I could sense it in every glance, every word, every movement around me. My life, my trust, my very being was being prepared for a fall so catastrophic, so irreparable that even surviving it might not be enough. And that was the hook, the terrible, irresistible truth that I carried in my chest like a ticking bomb. The world I had known was a lie. Every person I trusted was a potential threat, and the story I thought I was living was already orchestrated toward my undoing. The morning after, the apartment felt heavier, as if the walls themselves carried the memory of yesterday's tension. Every step I took resonated with a silent warning, a pulse of dread threading through my body. I moved cautiously down the hallway, the wood creaking beneath my feet. Each groan a reminder that the space I called home was unstable, fragile, dangerous. I caught Vanessa's reflection in the hallway mirror, her posture stiff, her eyes darting, always searching, always calculating. And I realized that the woman who had raised me was no longer just my mother. She was a keeper of secrets too large, too dangerous for me to fully comprehend. Breakfast was silent except for the mechanical clatter of dishes. Daniel's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee mug. I knew that behind that controlled exterior was a storm I could not yet see, but I could feel it in every movement, every exhale, every word that wasn't said. My mother passed me a plate of scrambled eggs, her hands trembling subtly, betraying the calm mask she wore. I wanted to ask, to demand answers, but I didn't. I had learned the hard way that curiosity could be dangerous, that probing into truths meant navigating a minefield of emotions and betrayals that could explode without warning. School was worse. Every glance at friends, teachers, even strangers on the subway felt like a threat. My mind was hyper-aware, cataloging potential dangers, decoding hidden meanings in conversations, reading gestures and micro-expressions like a language I was only beginning to master. I couldn't tell anyone, couldn't explain the undercurrent of deceit that pulsed through my life. Even the closest people I had known for years could not be trusted with these truths. I was alone in this awareness, and that isolation was as sharp as any knife. I remember the first moment I realized just how deep the betrayal went. A folder I accidentally saw on my mother's laptop, labeled with dates and names I had never seen before, opened like a window to a world I wasn't meant to glimpse. Conversations she thought I would never understand, moments of intimacy and lies woven so tightly that the fabric of my childhood had begun to tear. The secrecy was deliberate, meticulous, a dance of deception designed to protect her. Yet it made me the inadvertent witness to something far beyond my years. I couldn't reconcile the woman I knew with the actions I saw. Vanessa, the woman who had tucked me in, who had kissed my forehead, who had whispered words of comfort in the middle of storms, was also a person capable of acts I could barely comprehend. And Daniel, my father, who I had idolized in his quiet ways, in his careful discipline and steady presence, was blind to so much, manipulated by lies that I knew would eventually explode. The tension between them was palpable, like electricity in the air before a storm. Even my friends noticed a change in me. I tried to mask it, smile, joke, engage in conversations, but my laughter felt hollow, my responses calculated. I was constantly evaluating, measuring, predicting. Every text message, every glance across the classroom, every whispered secret carried the weight of potential discovery. I began to realize that my life had become a game I hadn't chosen to play, where every move could tip the balance toward disaster. Back at home, the arguments continued. Vanessa whispered into her phone, her voice urgent, filled with both fear and guilt. Daniel's eyes followed her, suspicion gnawing at his calm exterior. I watched them from the living room doorway, heart pounding, stomach twisted in knots. The unspoken threats between them were like invisible threads, pulling me along in a dance I didn't want to learn the steps to. Every action, every word, every glance was a calculation, and I had become the unwilling pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before I had any awareness of it. I spent hours in my room that afternoon, replaying snippets of conversations, searching for patterns, trying to decipher motives. The anxiety was constant, gnawing, a shadow over every thought. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake the foundations of this fragile, poisoned world, but I knew that action was dangerous. The adults around me were playing their own game, and I had no choice but to watch, to learn, to survive in the cracks between their decisions. By evening, the city outside glimmered like a separate world, indifferent to the web of lies and tension that had claimed my apartment. I pressed my forehead to the window, looking down at the streets, the rushing people, the lights, the endless hum of life continuing while mine felt trapped, a carefully contained experiment of deceit, manipulation, and emotional cruelty. I realized then that trust was no longer a currency I could afford. Every relationship, every bond, every act of love was layered with potential betrayal. As night fell, the apartment settled into a fragile quiet, but the undercurrent of tension remained. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my pulse quickened, in the shallow breaths I took. I knew that tomorrow would bring more revelations, more subtle threats, more moments where the facade of safety would crumble. And I understood with chilling clarity that the past and the present were intertwined in a way that left me powerless to prevent the coming storm. Lying in bed that night, I tried to imagine a life without fear, without secrets, without the constant, suffocating weight of betrayal pressing against my ribs. But I knew it was impossible. The threads had been woven too tightly, the lies too deep, the consequences too inevitable. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by images of whispered conversations, hidden messages, and the relentless knowledge that the world I thought I understood was already collapsing around me, and I was helpless to stop it. The next morning, the apartment was cloaked in a suffocating silence, thick and almost tangible. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that carried unspoken accusations, that held grudges and threats in every corner. I watched Daniel packing the living room, his face a mask of controlled rage and fear, as if he knew something terrible was about to happen, but wasn't yet sure how to stop it. Each step he took seemed measured, precise, deliberate, like a soldier preparing for battle, and I felt a shiver of fear run down my spine. My pulse raced in tandem with the rhythm of his packing, each footstep echoing the tension that hung over the apartment like a storm cloud ready to break. I tried to remain invisible, lurking on the edges of the room, my eyes absorbing every detail. The way Daniel clenched his jaw, the subtle twitch of his fingers, the lines around his eyes deepening with worry, everything screamed danger. Vanessa moved around him cautiously, a ghost navigating through a haunted house, aware of every potential misstep, every trigger that might provoke his wrath. I knew that they were both hiding things, secrets too heavy for a single person to bear, let alone a family. And I, despite being only 17, could sense the enormity of what was about to unfold. School was a blur of routine and pretense, a fragile mask I wore to protect myself from the relentless anxiety of knowing too much. Friends chatted, teachers lectured, the world outside continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. I felt the weight of observation, the constant scanning for danger, the decoding of conversations that might contain hints of truths no one was supposed to know. Every interaction, every glance, carried the potential for discovery, and the tension made my stomach churn with an almost physical ache. That That afternoon, I overheard a heated conversation between my parents, the words sharp and cutting. "You don't understand what you've done," Daniel's voice thundered, low but full of fury. Vanessa's reply was trembling, almost desperate. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I was trying to protect you, protect us." Her voice broke, laden with fear and guilt, but it carried an undertone of manipulation, a careful balancing act to keep herself safe while controlling the narrative. I felt a pang of anger and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to demand explanations, but I knew the danger of exposing myself too soon. The secrets I had discovered weren't just words on a screen. They were patterns, evidence of careful planning, of betrayal engineered over years. The way my mother had manipulated events, carefully orchestrating meetings, conversations, and interactions, made my stomach twist. Daniel, despite his apparent obliviousness, seemed aware on some level, his controlled anger a testament to a man trying desperately to hold onto what little control remained. And I, caught in the middle, understood with bone-deep clarity that there was no safe place for me in this house, no corner untouched by deception. Returning home, I found Daniel sitting rigidly at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee as though it held answers to questions he didn't dare ask. Vanessa hovered nearby, tense and silent. The room was charged, electric with anticipation, as if at any moment the fragile equilibrium could shatter into irreparable chaos. I felt my body tense in response, muscles tight, senses heightened, every nerve ending alive to the potential for disaster. I had learned, painfully, that this was how life would be. An intricate dance along a razor's edge, where a single misstep could lead to catastrophe. The evening descended with a muted glow from the city's skyline outside, the lights twinkling like distant stars that had no relevance to the turmoil inside. I moved quietly through the apartment, listening, observing, cataloging. Each subtle shift in tone, each flicker of emotion, each hidden glance told a story of its own. I could feel the history of betrayal and secrecy in the walls, in the furniture, in the very air I breathed. The apartment had become a stage for deception, and we were all actors trapped in roles we did not choose. I remembered the small details that had begun to make sense only in retrospect. The whispered phone calls late at night, the hurried texts deleted too quickly, the fleeting expressions of guilt and shame that Vanessa tried to mask behind calm words. Daniel's quiet insistence on control, his moments of fury masked with stoicism, were attempts to maintain order in a house teetering on the brink of moral collapse. I felt my own identity fracture under the weight of these realizations. My childhood, my understanding of love, trust, and family, had already been compromised long before I fully grasped the consequences. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the city sounds muffled by the thick walls but still present. Sirens, car horns, distant laughter. My mind churned with the knowledge that I had glimpsed truths too dangerous to fully confront, that my parents' lives were intertwined in a web of lies that would inevitably ensnare me. I could feel the tension coiling in my chest, a serpent tightening its grip, as I imagined the potential outcomes of this ever-escalating conflict. The storm was coming, and there would be no escape, no reprieve, no safe harbor. Sleep came fitfully, filled with fragmented visions of confrontations yet to happen, accusations and confessions yet to be spoken. I awoke multiple times in the night, heart racing, skin clammy, haunted by the knowledge that my life was already being dictated by forces beyond my control. The realization that every interaction, every choice, every secret, was leading inexorably toward disaster pressed down on me with suffocating weight. By morning, the apartment seemed smaller, the air thicker, the shadows darker. I could feel the inexorable pull of impending catastrophe, each heartbeat a reminder that the world I had known, the family I had trusted, was built on unstable ground. My parents' hidden truths, their unspoken resentments, their intricate deceptions, were shaping the reality around me. And in that realization, I understood the cruel inevitability of it all. There would be no gentle resolution, no simple explanation, no restoration of innocence. Only consequences, only chaos, only the merciless unfolding of actions set into motion long before I could intervene. The morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, but the warmth it promised never reached me. The streets of New York below buzzed with life, But from my vantage point, it was all a blur. A city moving forward, indifferent to the chaos brewing inside my small, suffocating world. I felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage, wings clipped by the secrets and betrayals surrounding me. Even the simple act of leaving my apartment to go to school felt like navigating a labyrinth of unseen dangers, each step potentially triggering a hidden collapse of everything I thought I knew. The subway ride was a test of endurance. Crowded, suffocating, full of strangers whose expressions I tried to read, whose intentions I couldn't know but felt intuitively. I had become hyper-aware of people, of their gestures, their glances, the subtle shifts in tone, searching for threats, for clues that might hint at the unspoken realities surrounding me. Every cough, every smile, every whisper seemed layered with potential meaning. I carried the burden of awareness like a stone in my chest, a constant weight reminding me that I was never truly safe, that the world had already taught me that innocence was a luxury I could no longer afford. At school, the pressure multiplied. Friends and classmates moved around me, laughing, talking, living lives that felt alien in their simplicity. I forced myself to participate, to smile, to nod at the right times, but every interaction felt like a calculated performance, each word carefully weighed, each movement scrutinized. Rumors floated through the halls like smoke, and I could feel them brushing against me, whispering doubts, questioning loyalties. I had learned to navigate these subtle currents with caution, to play a role that would protect me, while I observed the storm building beneath the surface. Then there were my teachers, each of them carrying their own assumptions about who I was, what I was capable of, unaware of the maelstrom of deceit and betrayal that defined my home life. I could sense judgment in their eyes, a kind of patronizing expectation, a subtle undercurrent of scrutiny that pressed against me, reminding me that I had to perform, had to maintain the fragile mask of normalcy, while the world I truly inhabited teetered on the edge of collapse. Friends tried to offer solace, but I could never fully trust their intentions. Even well-meaning gestures felt like potential traps, windows through which hidden truths might slip, secrets might be revealed, lies might unravel. I had learned early that attachment was dangerous, that relying on anyone could expose vulnerabilities I could not afford to show. And yet, I craved connection, yearned for someone to see me truly, to understand the pressure, the fear, the unrelenting anxiety that shaped every heartbeat. One afternoon, a confrontation in the hallway brought a harsh reminder of the fragility of these social bonds. A whispered comment, a casual glance misinterpreted, set off a chain reaction of judgment and rumor that left me reeling. I felt the walls close in, the pressure mounting until every breath was a struggle. The experience crystallized a fundamental truth. The outside world was just as dangerous as the internal chaos of my home, and every interaction was a minefield waiting to detonate. At lunch, I sat alone, observing, calculating. My mother's betrayal, my father's blind fury, and my own growing understanding of the lies around me created a constant, gnawing tension. I imagined confrontations, scenarios, outcomes, all of them leading to disaster. I couldn't tell anyone, couldn't share my knowledge, couldn't reveal the threads I had begun to untangle. Even sharing a simple smile or word of kindness felt like it could be weaponized, turned against me in ways I could not yet foresee. Back at home, the dynamic between Vanessa and Daniel grew more volatile. I could hear muffled arguments through the walls, the tension like a living entity, pressing down on the apartment, on me. I sensed the manipulation, the subtle maneuvering, the ways in which each parent tried to control not only each other, but also the unfolding consequences of their own choices. I felt myself being shaped by this tension, molded into a vigilant observer, a careful navigator of dangerous waters, a child forced to grow up too quickly. At night, the city lights below were indifferent, a cruel contrast to the turmoil in my world. I lay in bed, imagining all the possibilities, all the potential outcomes, all the ways things could spiral into irreversible chaos. Every creak in the floorboards, every muted footstep, every whispered conversation seemed amplified, charged with meaning, threatening to tip the delicate balance toward disaster. I understood, with a painful clarity, that I was living in a world where the smallest actions could have catastrophic consequences, where the sins of adults dictated the reality of my existence. Sleep was uneasy, haunted by visions of confrontation, exposure, and the slow, inevitable unveiling of secrets that had been hidden for years. I woke in the night, heart pounding, mind racing, a constant awareness that the world I lived in was not only unsafe but actively hostile, a place where betrayal was currency, trust was a weakness, and innocence was already lost. The morning light felt heavier than usual, seeping through the blinds like molten gold, but it brought no warmth. I could feel it pressing against my skin, reminding me that the day would be just as suffocating as the ones before. I moved through the apartment cautiously, listening to the faint murmurs from the kitchen. Vanessa's voice was low, almost conspiratorial, and Daniel's response carried a tension that made the air in the room vibrate. I knew, even without seeing them, that the storm between my parents was intensifying, and I was trapped in the eye of it. Breakfast was a silent ritual, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the occasional sigh that spoke louder than words ever could. I sat, observing them both, cataloging every flicker of emotion, every twitch of a muscle, every shadow of guilt or anger. I had become hyper-aware, almost painfully so, of the undercurrents that dictated their interactions. My mother's careful control, the way she measured every word before speaking, the way her eyes shifted when Daniel looked at her too long, all revealed a deeper, darker layer of deception I wasn't sure I was ready to fully comprehend. School, as always, offered no refuge. The hallways felt like minefields, each whisper, each glance, each laugh potentially masking judgments I couldn't yet name. Friends, casual conversations, teachers' offhand remarks, even the random announcements over the PA seemed loaded with hidden meaning, interpreted through the lens of my hyper-aware mind. I had begun to anticipate betrayal everywhere, reading intentions and motives that weren't always there, but which had been reinforced by the intricate web of lies I had discovered at home. I remembered that moment, in the cafeteria, when I overheard snippets of a conversation between classmates that mirrored, in some strange and unsettling way, the duplicity in my own family. Their gossip was petty compared to the deep, corrosive deceit I was witnessing at home, but it felt like a reflection, a reminder that betrayal was everywhere, in every interaction, in every relationship. It made me realize with chilling clarity that the world outside my apartment was just as treacherous as the one inside, and that trust was no longer a currency I could afford. By afternoon, the weight of observation had turned into a relentless pressure in my chest. I found a quiet corner in the library, buried behind stacks of books, and tried to anchor myself in study, in routine. But the tranquility was illusory. Every time I turned a page, I saw shadows at the edges of my vision, imagined whispers just beyond hearing. My mind replayed scenes from home: Daniel's tightened jaw, Vanessa's trembling hands, the subtle glances, the half-spoken words. It all coalesced into a constant, gnawing anxiety, a pressure that felt physical, like stones pressing against my ribs. Even my own reflection in the library's glass window seemed altered. The girl staring back at me wasn't entirely me. She was someone forged by betrayal and secrecy, hardened by years of watching, calculating, anticipating. I realized that I was no longer a passive observer of life. I had become a participant in a game I had not chosen to play. My every movement, my every word, my every thought was now influenced by the knowledge I carried, by the secrets I had uncovered, by the truths I wasn't allowed to reveal.
If this story hits you, you can support the channel with a quick hype.
Returning home, the tension was palpable. Vanessa was in the living room, her posture taut, her eyes flicking nervously toward the front door as if expecting anyone, to intrude upon the delicate balance she had maintained for so long. Daniel's presence was equally formidable, a silent, looming force whose gaze alone could make the walls of the apartment seem smaller, suffocating. I watched them both from the staircase, heart pounding, every nerve alive with anticipation, knowing that another confrontation was imminent, that another crack in the fragile facade of our home would open wide. That evening, I caught a glimpse of a folder on Vanessa's laptop. The contents were partially visible: emails, messages, photographs, all documenting carefully orchestrated encounters, secretive meetings, a timeline of deceit that extended far beyond my comprehension. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, trying to process the implications. Each entry was a revelation, a puzzle piece that completed a picture I was too young, too unprepared to fully understand. Yet the horror was undeniable. My life, my family, the very foundation of everything I had known, was built on lies. Dinner was tense. Words were spoken, but they were measured, guarded. Each bite of food seemed heavy, each glance a potential trigger. I could feel the pulse of conflict vibrating through the apartment, threading through the walls, binding us all in a shared, unspoken tension. I wondered fleetingly if we would survive this storm, if any of us could remain unscathed by the revelations and betrayals that seemed inevitable. Later that night, lying in bed, I replayed the day in relentless detail. I imagined confrontations yet to occur, the potential reactions of my parents, the paths the lies could take, the outcomes that would inevitably hurt someone. I felt a gnawing sense of dread, a certainty that the delicate balance that had kept our lives together would soon collapse. The weight of knowledge pressed down on me, heavy and unyielding, reminding me that I was a witness to something I could never unsee, a participant in a tragedy that had already begun its inexorable march. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by imagined scenes of confrontation and exposure. I awoke several times, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, haunted by the awareness that every interaction, every word, every secret carried consequences that I could not control. The house, the city, the world itself seemed poised on a knife's edge, each movement capable of tipping the balance into irreparable chaos. And I understood, with chilling clarity, that there would be no return to innocence, no restoration of trust, no reprieve from the unfolding storm. The apartment felt smaller than ever that morning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, but it didn't illuminate warmth or comfort. It highlighted every crack in the walls, every shadow, every unspoken secret that seemed to cling to the furniture and the air itself. I had learned to move carefully, to navigate through this space like a tightrope walker over a pit of hidden dangers. Each step I took, each breath I drew, felt measured, intentional, as though any misstep could unravel the fragile equilibrium of the household. Daniel was in the kitchen, his posture rigid, fingers tapping on the counter, the very air around him vibrating with tension. Vanessa hovered nearby, her eyes darting between him and me, the lines of worry etched deep into her face. She tried to mask her anxiety with a smile, but it faltered, revealing glimpses of a darker reality. I could see the patterns now, how her subtle manipulations, her carefully timed words, her hidden strategies, were designed not just to control Daniel, but to control the trajectory of my own life. And I was beginning to understand that the world I had trusted was built entirely on deception. Leaving for school, the city seemed unusually hostile. The streets of New York were alive with movement, with the hum of traffic, the chatter of strangers, the distant blare of sirens. But every sound felt exaggerated, every glance a potential threat. I navigated the subway with heightened vigilance, my senses stretched to their limit. The stories my friends shared, the jokes, the casual complaints, they felt hollow compared to the storm I carried in my chest. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of betrayal, suspicion, and the gnawing dread that truth could reveal itself at any moment. At school, the weight of observation became unbearable. My friends' interactions felt like games with hidden rules, and I was acutely aware that I could no longer trust anyone's words at face value. Each conversation, each laugh, each seemingly innocuous gesture carried a potential layer of meaning I had to decode. I had learned to anticipate lies, to see through half-truths, to parse the subtle cues that could betray someone's hidden intentions. And with that awareness came a crushing responsibility. Knowing too much, seeing too clearly, and understanding that the secrets I carried could destroy everything if exposed. By afternoon, I had discovered more fragments of Vanessa's duplicity. Hidden emails, veiled conversations, and carefully erased texts revealed a deliberate, meticulous orchestration of events that implicated me in a web far larger than I had imagined. My pulse raced, my stomach twisted, as I pieced together how her actions were setting the stage for disaster. The realization was suffocating. My life, my very sense of self, was being manipulated by someone I should have trusted most. Back home, the atmosphere was electric with unspoken tension. Daniel's frustration simmered just below the surface, a constant threat of eruption. Vanessa's careful facade of composure was beginning to crack, and I could see the strategies, the plans, the deceptions unraveling in real time. The air was thick with anticipation, with danger, with the unrelenting pressure of truths that could no longer remain hidden. I felt myself shrinking, retreating into the shadows, trying to remain unseen, trying to survive the emotional tempest swirling around me. Dinner was tense beyond description. Words were few but loaded, each syllable a potential trigger. I sensed Daniel's suppressed anger, Vanessa's strategic deflection, and my own precarious position in the middle of this invisible battlefield. The table became a stage for silent confrontations, for microaggressions, for the carefully choreographed dance of deception that defined every family interaction. I realized with sharp clarity that the home I had known was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war zone, and I was trapped inside, unable to escape, unable to defend myself fully. Later that night, I found myself in my room, staring at the ceiling, heart racing, mind spinning. I replayed the day, overanalyzing each interaction, each word, each glance. The threads of my mother's deceit were unspooling before me, revealing a tapestry of lies, betrayal, and dangerous manipulations. I felt anger, fear, and a profound sense of helplessness. Every attempt to understand or confront seemed destined to fail, and I recognized the chilling inevitability. The deeper I probed, the more I uncovered, the closer I moved to the moment when everything would collapse. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by visions of confrontations, of exposure, of the inevitable chaos that lay ahead. I woke in the night, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the gnawing certainty that nothing in my life would ever be simple or safe again. The house, the city, the world beyond my walls, everything seemed poised on a knife's edge, every choice a potential trigger for catastrophe. I had become a prisoner not of physical walls, but of knowledge, awareness, and an unrelenting sense of impending doom. By morning, the apartment felt like a pressure cooker, each sound amplified, each shadow threatening. I realized that the next steps I would take, the smallest decisions, would determine the trajectory of the unfolding disaster. Vanessa's manipulations, Daniel's suppressed rage, the secrets I had uncovered, all were converging into a climax I could neither prevent nor escape. The house seemed to breathe around me, alive with tension, ready to explode. And I, Emily Carter, 17 years old, was trapped in the eye of a storm too powerful to weather alone. The day began like any other, but I could feel the tension vibrating in the air, thick and suffocating, like a storm about to break. As I descended the narrow staircase from my bedroom, the smell of breakfast, burnt toast, strong coffee, was overpowered by the unspoken animosity lingering between my parents. Vanessa's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and in that instant, I knew she understood that I had uncovered more than she had anticipated. Her smile, though practiced, faltered, revealing a flicker of panic that made my chest tighten with unease. Daniel's presence at the kitchen table was imposing, almost predatory. The muscles in his jaw flexed as he sipped his coffee, eyes darting to Vanessa, then to me, measuring, calculating, waiting for a misstep. I felt like an intruder in a room that should have been safe, a home that should have provided comfort. Every word, every gesture carried a weight of consequence I could no longer ignore. I was a witness now, a participant in the unraveling of the life I had known, and each passing second made the stakes unbearably high. At school, the corridors seemed to pulse with the energy of a world oblivious to my internal chaos. Friends moved around me, laughing and talking, but their voices sounded distant, muted by the storm inside me. I caught glimpses of their faces, trying to reconcile their carefree demeanor with the heavy knowledge I carried. Every whisper, every glance, seemed amplified, as if the universe itself was conspiring to remind me that the truth I had uncovered was a burden too large for anyone my age to bear. The first confrontation came abruptly. A friend, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface, mentioned something about their own parents' secrets. It triggered a cascade of memories, revelations, and half-understood truths. I felt my pulse quicken, my stomach churn, and my hands shake. The floodgates opened, and for the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the reality of what Vanessa had done, the intricate web of lies she had woven, and the danger that now hung over all of us. By afternoon, I had retreated to a quiet corner of the school library, desperate to regain control, to anchor myself in something tangible. But the sanctuary was fleeting. Thoughts of home, of Daniel's restrained anger, of Vanessa's manipulations, intruded relentlessly. I sketched scenarios in my mind, imagining confrontations, arguments, moments where secrets would be revealed, and the inevitable consequences. Each possibility was darker than the last, each vision a reminder of how fragile the life I had known truly was. Returning home, the tension escalated to a tangible, almost physical presence. Vanessa was packing, her voice low and urgent as she spoke into the phone. Daniel leaned against the wall, silent, his eyes sharp and unblinking, as if he could see through walls, through doors, into the very heart of the deception surrounding us. I hovered near the staircase, observing, feeling the air thrum with anticipation, knowing that another confrontation was imminent, that the delicate equilibrium of our household could shatter at any moment. Dinner was a war of silence and subtle attacks. Every movement, every glance, every word was a loaded weapon. I felt like a chess piece in a game where the rules were constantly changing, and the players were unaware of how far the stakes extended. Vanessa's calculated manipulations, Daniel's simmering fury, my own knowledge of the truth, it all collided in a tense, fragile balance. I understood that the next moments could redefine everything, could tip the scales toward chaos. Later that night, I retreated to my room, heart pounding, thoughts racing. I replayed the day in relentless detail, analyzing every exchange, every gesture, every word. The threads of deceit, betrayal, and hidden agendas were unraveling before me, and I realized that there was no turning back. My perspective had shifted permanently. I was no longer just a child in my parents' world. I was a witness to the machinery of lies that dictated every action, every decision, every heartbeat. Sleep came, but it offered no reprieve. I dreamed of confrontations, of revelations, of moments where trust was broken and chaos ruled. My subconscious mind replayed every interaction, every whisper, every secret I had uncovered. The house, the city, the world itself seemed poised on a knife's edge, each movement capable of triggering irreversible disaster. I awoke multiple times, drenched in sweat, heart racing, haunted by the certainty that nothing would ever return to normal. By dawn, the apartment was a pressure cooker. Every sound, every shadow, every glance carried weight. I knew the next day would bring further escalation. The delicate balance that had maintained our family was irreparably broken, and I was trapped in the middle of it, forced to observe, forced to endure, forced to navigate a minefield of betrayal, anger, and impending tragedy. I understood, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that the unfolding chaos would not leave any of us untouched, and that survival would demand sacrifices I was only beginning to comprehend. The morning air felt heavier than ever, as if New York itself was conspiring against me. The streets were alive with their usual chaos, honking horns, hurried footsteps, distant sirens, but every sound seemed amplified, echoing the storm brewing in my chest. I walked to school with my head down, trying to disappear into the crowd, to become invisible, but I knew it was impossible. The weight of what I had discovered at home pressed down on me, each step a reminder that the world I had trusted was nothing but a fragile illusion. Vanessa's voice haunted me even before I opened the door. The subtle way she had manipulated every interaction, every word, every gesture was now painfully clear. She had orchestrated an entire web of deception, not just for Daniel, but for me, her own daughter. I felt anger, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing fear. How could the person who was supposed to protect me from harm be the one responsible for it? The thought churned in my stomach, making it hard to breathe, to move, to think clearly. At school, everything seemed sharper, more intense. Every glance, every whisper, every laugh felt loaded with meaning, as if the world itself were judging me for the knowledge I carried. I had become hyper-aware, reading hidden motives in the eyes of classmates, detecting subtle shifts in tone, interpreting gestures with an almost unbearable precision. My mind was a labyrinth of suspicion, anxiety, and dread, each corridor leading to new fears and potential disasters. By lunchtime, I had discovered more evidence of Vanessa's deceit. Emails, messages, and half-erased notes revealed encounters and decisions that had been deliberately hidden from me and Daniel. Each revelation was a dagger twisting deeper into my chest, the cumulative weight of betrayal threatening to crush me under its magnitude. I realized that the life I had known, the trust I had placed in my family, was gone, replaced by a maze of lies that had been carefully constructed to control, manipulate, and deceive. Returning home, the tension was palpable, almost suffocating. Daniel's presence was a storm barely restrained. His silence was filled with latent fury, every flex of his muscles a reminder that disaster could erupt at any moment. Vanessa's attempts to maintain composure were faltering, cracks appearing in the carefully curated facade she had presented for so long. I hovered near the staircase, heart pounding, senses on high alert, knowing that the next confrontation could change everything, could shatter our lives irreparably. Dinner was a battlefield of silent aggression and veiled threats. Each bite of food felt heavy, each glance an accusation, each word a potential spark for conflict. I understood the unspoken rules now. Every interaction was a negotiation, every sentence a carefully chosen weapon. I sat silently, absorbing the tension, measuring my words, my expressions, my reactions. One wrong move, one misjudged glance, could set off a chain reaction that none of us could control. Later that night, I retreated to my room, desperate for a moment of solitude, a brief reprieve from the chaos surrounding me. But even there, peace was fleeting. My mind replayed the day in excruciating detail. Vanessa's manipulations, Daniel's controlled anger, the hidden conversations, the secrets that threatened to destroy us all. I realized that I was no longer just a passive observer. I was entangled in a web of deceit and danger, a witness to a tragedy that was unfolding with relentless inevitability. Sleep was fitful, haunted by visions of confrontations, revelations, and irreversible consequences. Every sound in the apartment, every shadow, every creak of the floorboards became a harbinger of chaos. I woke multiple times, heart racing, drenched in sweat, overwhelmed by the knowledge that my life, my family, and my sense of safety were all teetering on the edge of collapse. The storm was no longer distant. It had arrived, and I was trapped in its center. By dawn, the apartment felt like a cage. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Every step, every movement, every word was a potential trigger for disaster. I realized that the coming days would demand decisions, actions, and sacrifices I was not prepared for. The delicate balance of our family, the fragile trust that had held us together, was irreparably broken. I was left with nothing but the knowledge of impending devastation, the weight of secrets too dangerous to speak, and the unbearable pressure of survival in a home ruled by lies. The morning dawned like a weight pressing down on my chest, making every breath shallow and every heartbeat echo too loudly in my ears. I moved through the apartment cautiously, aware of every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of air, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to expose the secrets I had been forced to uncover. Vanessa was in the kitchen, her presence both magnetic and suffocating. Every glance she cast a reminder that she controlled far more than I could comprehend. Daniel sat silently at the table, the rigid lines of his posture radiating tension and unspoken fury, his eyes sharp and calculating, as if he could sense my every thought before it even formed. Breakfast was an exercise in restraint. Words were spoken sparingly, loaded with subtext, each gesture carrying weight and potential consequences. I observed them both, cataloging the micro-expressions, the fleeting gestures, the barely audible sighs that revealed more than any conversation could. The knowledge I carried was both a burden and a weapon, shaping my every move and forcing me to navigate the treacherous terrain of my own home with surgical precision. Every glance, every word, every breath was a negotiation in a game I had never agreed to play. By mid-morning, I found myself wandering the streets of New York with a restless energy that bordered on panic. The city, vibrant and alive, felt like a labyrinth designed to trap me, each alley and intersection a mirror to the twisting paths of deceit and betrayal that had come to define my life. Faces blurred past me, strangers' laughter and conversations piercing my consciousness like shards of glass. I felt alien in my own skin, Disconnected from a world that seemed oblivious to the web of lies and manipulation, I carried with me everywhere I went. At school, the pressure was unrelenting. Every interaction became a test, every conversation a potential threat. Friends, casual remarks took on sinister undertones, and even teachers, neutral instructions felt layered with meaning I was hyper-aware of. My mind, once a refuge for learning and growth, had become a battlefield where every thought was scrutinized, every possibility anticipated. I had become a participant in an invisible war, where the stakes were life-altering and the consequences irreversible. By afternoon, the first cracks of confrontation appeared. A rumor, innocuous on the surface, reached my ears, and I immediately recognized its potential to ignite chaos. The careful balance that had kept our household functioning was fracturing, and I felt the pressure of inevitability crushing me. I could not remain a passive observer any longer. I was forced into the center of the storm, where every decision, every reaction, every word could tip the fragile equilibrium into disaster. Returning home, the tension was almost unbearable. Vanessa's movements were precise and deliberate, yet every misstep, every hesitation, betrayed the mounting pressure she felt. Daniel's eyes followed her every motion, unblinking, calculating, his suppressed anger simmering just beneath the surface. I felt myself shrinking into the shadows, desperate to remain unseen, to avoid being swept into the whirlwind of confrontation and violence that seemed imminent. Dinner was a microcosm of chaos, a battlefield disguised as a family meal. The clinking of cutlery and muted conversation masked the undercurrent of threat, tension, and anticipation. I felt the weight of history pressing down on me, the past, present, and future converging into a single, excruciatingly fragile moment. Each interaction was a potential catalyst for disaster, each glance a silent accusation, each word a spark waiting to ignite a powder keg. By evening, I had discovered more evidence of Vanessa's intricate manipulations. Hidden emails, forgotten messages, carefully curated encounters, all orchestrated with meticulous precision to control the narrative and shape my life. The realization was suffocating. My life, my family, my sense of reality had been a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me compliant, unaware, and trapped. Anger, fear, and a sense of helplessness gnawed at me from within, threatening to consume any remaining semblance of innocence. As night fell, I retreated to my room, seeking refuge in solitude, but the sanctuary was illusory. Shadows in the corners of my room seemed to whisper threats. The hum of the city outside mirrored the turmoil within, and every breath reminded me of the fragility of my existence. I realized that the next days, hours, minutes could bring events that would forever alter the course of my life. I was teetering on the precipice of tragedy, and there was no safety to be found. Sleep, when it came, offered no escape. Dreams twisted the events of the day into horrifying scenarios, confrontations with unavoidable consequences, and visions of lives shattered beyond repair. I awoke repeatedly, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, aware that the fragile veneer of normalcy had been destroyed. The coming crisis was no longer theoretical. It was imminent, unavoidable, and poised to engulf all of us in chaos, leaving only scars, loss, and devastation in its wake. Day began in a haze of dread, a heaviness in my chest that made every step toward the living room feel like walking through thick fog. The air in the apartment was electric, charged with unspoken hostility. Vanessa was tense, her movements sharp and calculated, every glance toward Daniel laced with anxiety and hidden intent. Daniel himself was a storm contained within a man's frame, his eyes dark with suppressed fury, muscles taut as he moved silently, measuring, waiting for the precise moment to act. I knew something irreversible was coming. I could feel it in the tremor of the walls, in the tremble of my own hands, in the sharpness of my pulse against my ribs. The argument began innocuously enough, or at least that's what it seemed on the surface. A word spoken, a glance misinterpreted, and suddenly the air was thick with tension, every second stretching like an eternity. Daniel's voice, low and dangerous, reverberated through the apartment, each word a carefully aimed weapon. Vanessa's responses were quick, defensive, but betraying cracks in her composure. And I was trapped between them, knowing that the culmination of all the lies, all the hidden agendas, all the betrayals, was about to explode in a way that none of us could contain. I I retreated to the edge of the room, watching as the confrontation escalated. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and the world seemed to narrow to a single point, the dangerous intersection of anger, betrayal, and impending violence. I could hear the cold click of a gun being cocked, a sound that made my entire body freeze. Daniel had made the choice, had decided that the only way to assert control was through force, unaware of the precise consequences that would follow. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to flee, but my legs felt glued to the floor. The moment of impact came faster than I expected. A shot rang out, a deafening crack that shattered the fragile silence, and the world spun in a kaleidoscope of pain, confusion, and terror. I felt a searing, unimaginable pain as the bullet struck my eye, and the world around me dissolved into chaos. Screams, the crash of furniture, the sound of a gun hitting the floor, and then silence, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breath, shallow, desperate, terrified. Blood burned against my cheek, my vision shattered, and the realization hit me with unbearable clarity. My life, my family, my very existence had been irrevocably changed in a single, catastrophic moment. I collapsed to the floor, gripping my face, my screams piercing the air, carrying the weight of betrayal, loss, and unimaginable pain. Vanessa's face contorted in horror, Daniel's fury collapsed into panic, and the apartment that had once been my home became a battlefield, a tomb of innocence lost and trust shattered. My life, the carefully constructed web of relationships and secrets, had exploded into fragments, each shard a reminder of deceit, manipulation, and irreversible damage. Paramedics arrived, the chaos of sirens and flashing lights melding with my spiraling panic. The streets outside, the apartment, the city itself seemed to tremble with the weight of the events unfolding. Vanessa's hands trembled as she reached for me, but the damage was done. Daniel was restrained, his rage replaced by despair, and I lay in the ambulance, every pulse of pain a reminder that nothing would ever return to the way it had been. Hospital lights were harsh, blinding, sterile. Nurses and doctors moved with precision, but I was lost in a haze of agony and disbelief. My life had been irrevocably altered, not just physically, with the loss of sight in one eye, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. The betrayal, the deception, the hidden truths, all coalesced into a singular, suffocating weight that threatened to crush me from the inside out. Days blurred together in the hospital. Recovery was excruciating, each bandage, each medication, each whisper of concern a reminder of the fragility of existence. I could not escape the knowledge that the carefully hidden lies that had orchestrated this moment were not just the product of chance. They were deliberate, calculated, and orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to love and protect me. Vanessa's deceit, Daniel's anger, my own helplessness, all intertwined into a tapestry of pain and despair that I could not unravel. As I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized the stark reality of my existence. Life as I knew it was over. The apartment, the family, the trust, the innocence, they were all gone. My childhood, my sense of safety, my faith in the people around me, had been obliterated in a single, catastrophic instant. The trauma, both physical and emotional, would mark every aspect of my life forever. By the time I returned home, the apartment was unrecognizable. Every object, every wall, every shadow was a reminder of the explosion of betrayal, anger, and violence that had occurred. My vision was forever altered, my trust shattered, and the delicate fabric of our lives irreparably torn. The storm that had been brewing for years had finally descended, leaving devastation, heartbreak, and an endless, suffocating ache in its wake. My name is Emily Carter. I am 17, and my life as I knew it is gone forever.
If you've ever felt this kind of pain, don't walk through it alone. Hit subscribe and stay with us. More real stories are coming.